Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee. My name is Natalie Quinton, and I am delighted to serve as your worship associate today and to welcome you fully in this space. We welcome people of all genders, sexualities, ages, races, ethnicities, histories, and bodies here. We welcome your mind, your heart, and your spirit here. We welcome all you are bringing with you today and all your heart longs to set down. We welcome all of you. We extend a special welcome to each guest among us. We invite our guests to fill out a welcome card located in the pew rack in front of you and drop it off in the offering plate later in the service. Guests may also pick up a welcome packet at the back of the sanctuary, where folks will also find hearing assist devices and Braille hymnals. A fragrance-free area is located in the front right side in the first pews. If you are a visiting family, including children or youth, after the time for all ages noted in your order of service, please join the children's recessional and head across the hall to the common room. There you'll be greeted by someone who will orient you to religious education. Immediately following the service, everyone is invited for coffee and conversation in the common room. Again, my name is Natalie, and you can come talk to me there at the guest table. As a way to engage at First Church, I invite you to explore the announcements insert for the numerous opportunities available here. In particular, let me draw your attention to a few. See page 2 of your announcements insert for information on the UFTA potluck and the Swans potluck today. Read about our holiday choir on page 5 and the need for holiday elves on page 7. There are also many opportunities for social justice this month. See pages 3 and 4 to learn about the Interfaith Luncheon, Community Conversation with Common Ground, Reparations Workshop with Black Lives Matter, Faith in the Streets Kickoff, and Strike for the Climate. Finally, please silence any electronic devices for the remainder of the service. I'm pleased to introduce our pulpit guest today, Reverend Marcus Fogliano, who is the project manager for the Commission on Institutional Change at the Unitarian Universalist Association, the seminarian at Meadville Lombard Theological School. Marcus is an intersectional advocate in Illinois and finds their calling in Unitarian Universalism as an institutional minister. As an ordained former Jehovah's Witness, they spend a lot of time thinking about faith organizational and institutional systems and what wisdoms of world religions around systems are useful to UUism as a faith movement. Please help me in welcoming Reverend Marcus Fogliano. Thank you. Now, once again, I welcome you to First Church by inviting you to join me in the unison reading of our mission, which is printed in your order of service. We gather to nurture the spirit, engage the mind, and inspire action. Now, Marcus will come up for our opening words.
Good morning. Our opening words today are often used as covenants by many of our fellow UU congregations across the country. These words come from the Reverend James Val Blake. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, seek the truth in love, and help one another. Please rise in body and/or spirit for our opening hymn.
The story I have for you today is called The Promise by Nicola Davies. When I was young, I lived in a city that was mean and hard and ugly. Its streets were as dry as dust, cracked by heat and cold, and never blessed with rain. A gritty yellow wind blew constantly, scratching around the buildings like a hungry dog. Nothing grew. Everything was broken. No one ever smiled. The people had grown as mean and ugly and as hard as their city, and I was mean and hard and ugly too. I lived by stealing from those who had almost as little as I did. My heart was as shriveled as a dead tree in the park. And then, one night, I saw an old lady down a dark street. She was frail and alone, an easy victim. Her bag was fat and full, but when I tried to snatch it from her, she held on with the strength of heroes. To and fro we pulled that bag until at last she said, "If you promise to plant them, I'll let go." What did she mean? I didn't know. I didn't care. "All right, I promise," I said. She loosened her grip and then smiled at me. I ran off without a backward glance, thinking of the food and the money in her bag. But when I opened it, the bag held only acorns. I stared at them, so green, so perfect, and so many. And I understood the promise that I had made. I held a forest in my arms, and my heart changed. I forgot about the food and the money, and for the first time in my life I felt lucky, rich, beyond my wildest dreams. I slept with those acorns as my pillow. My head was full of leafy visions, and in the morning I began to keep my promise. I planted, besides roads, at rotaries, among rubble and ruins and rusty rails, by train tracks and tram lines and traffic lights, in abandoned parks, in gardens laced with broken glass, behind factories and shopping malls, bus stops, cafes, and even apartment buildings. I pushed aside the mean and the hard and the ugly, and I planted and planted and planted. Nothing changed at first. The gritty wind still scratched and parched the cracked streets. The people still scowled and scuttled to their homes like cockroaches. But slowly, little green shoots began to show. Trees, first here, then there, then everywhere. People came out into the streets to see, and they would touch the leaves in wonder, and they would smile. They had tea together by the little tiny trees, and they talked, and they laughed. And pretty soon, they began planting too, trees and flowers and fruits and vegetables in parks and in gardens, on balconies and even rooftops. Green spread through the city like a song, breathing to the sky, drawing down the rain like a blessing. But by then, I was far away, planting in another sad and sorry city, and another, and another, and another. And then last night, in a lonely alley, a young thief fought me for my sack of acorns, and I smiled, and I made that old bargain, knowing how a heart can change, knowing that my planting would go on. The end. Please rise as you are able in body and spirit for our next hymn, For the Beauty of This Earth.
I invite you into a moment of centering. I will share with you these spoken words, and then we will enter into a moment of silent meditation. Following this meditation, I ask you to stay grounded in your seats as we sing hymn 123 from the great hymnal, Spirit of Life. These spoken words of meditation are by the Reverend Mark Morrison Reed, a UU historian and a minister who has served congregations within our UUA Association and the Canadian Council of Unitarian Universalism. The task of the religious community. The central task of the religious community is to unveil the bond that binds us to each other, to all. There is a connectedness, a relationship discovered amid the particulars of our own lives and the lives of others. Once felt, it inspires us to act for justice. It is the church that assures us that we are not struggling for justice on our own, but as members of a larger community. The religious community is essential, for alone our vision is too narrow to see all that must be seen, and our strength too limited to do all that must be done. Together our vision widens and our strength is renewed. As we enter into exploring today's topic, I offer you this reading from the Cambridge Platform of the Church Discipline, 1648, by the Congregational Churches of Massachusetts, Cambridge Synod. But the Lord Jesus commune with all our hearts in secret, and he who is the King of his church, let him be pleased to exercise his kingly power in our spirits, that so his kingdom may come into our churches in purity and peace. Milwaukee, and the Reverend Jennifer Nordstrom and the staff here for the invitation to share my vision of Unitarian Universalism with you all today, and all that helped me to get here from Chicago. I'm glad to be back here after enjoying your warm hospitality earlier this spring as the UU Association of Membership Professionals held their annual gathering here. And with that, I bring greetings from the Universalist Unitarian Church of Peoria, Illinois, my home congregation, and from all of my colleagues at the Unitarian Universalist Association. While Jennifer and I have had the opportunity to get to know each other over the years, I think it's important that I share a little background about who I am with you and provide some context as to why I've come to spend so much time engaged in reflection on the ways in which Unitarian Universalism as a movement manifests itself within the world. My mother, when I was 4 years old, married a Jehovah's Witness. I grew up in that faith and had a deep commitment to the Jehovah's Witnesses as a faith community and as an institution. The call to serve Jehovah, specifically at the world headquarters, hit me when I was only 5. I dedicated my life to that ministry at the age of 13 and helped to form an American Sign Language congregation in Peoria, Illinois, just 2 years later. In my youth, I learned as much as I could about how my religious institution worked and how to prepare myself to serve that international community. Jehovah's Witnesses, as you may know, are not very affirming of trans and queer people. So 10 years ago, I was removed from my faith home. It was a painful time. I struggled to find purpose for my life until I found my ministry once again in social justice work. And through that social justice work, that work to support the LGBT community, I came to know and find my new home in Unitarian Universalism. The ability for me to process that pain and struggle of faith following my departure from Jehovah's Witnesses has been supported by many, including my church in Peoria and my colleagues within religious leadership around the country. Processing that religious trauma has equipped me with the skills to be reflective and to look back on my institutional knowledge of the governance of Jehovah's Witnesses to distinguish that which is useful in our anti-racism, anti-oppressive, and multicultural work within the Unitarian Universalist Association, and that which produces harm. Over the last 2 years, I've had the privilege to use these reflective skills in new ways. As the project manager of the Unitarian Universalist Association Commission on Institutional Change, I analyze our UU institutions, which requires a willingness to pull back and reflect on not only how we govern ourselves, but why we govern ourselves in that way. Recently, as I was sitting at the table with the UUA board, I had this moment that I lived into, and realizing how my call to institutional ministry that I had so many years ago as a Jehovah's Witness was actually preparing me for this institutional ministry that I find myself engaged in today. That said, I do want to clarify that the reflections I'm going to share with you today about how Unitarian Universalists are in relationship with one another are the thoughts of my own. They are informed by the conversations and the interactions and relationships I've had with Unitarian Universalists across the country, but are not spoken on behalf of the Unitarian Universalist Association or the Commission on Institutional Change. Okay, so sit back, relax, and let's talk about bylaws. I see some of you are nervous about that. Some of you, like me, may be interested in bylaws and policies, but I wish to dig a little bit deeper than bylaws and policies, to the theological framing that itself impacts how we structure our institutions and structure those institutions within our bylaws and policies. You see, I am a polity nerd, and I'm here to talk about polity. That is the way a faith community is governed. The historical document that the Unitarian Universalist Association draws its polity from is known as the Cambridge Platform of 1648, and it defines polity in this way: ecclesiastical polity, or church governance or discipline, is nothing else but that form and order that is to be observed in the Church of Christ upon earth, both for the constitution of it and all the administration that therein are to be performed. Already, I feel like I'm quoting bylaws, so I promise I won't read to you anything more from the platform. It's an odd mix of legalese and theology and 17th century English, and it sometimes can just be a little bit confusing. So let's discuss instead how the stories we Unitarian Universalists tell ourselves about what we claim as our congregational polity, and how some of those stories are contradictory to the congregational polity defined within the Cambridge Platform. I offer you these three reflections: that congregational polity is misrepresented within some of these narratives, that congregational polity is inadequate for the shifting society that we live in today, and in practice, congregational polity is not the polity of modern-day Unitarian Universalists at all. To begin, let's just dive into what I mean by the misrepresentation of congregational polity. I'd like to start with a question to you all. This is going back to my Jehovah's Witnesses roots. It's an interactive, so I'm going to present you a question, and I ask that some folks volunteer to share their thoughts. We're going to enter into this moment with the understanding that we are a living tradition and we grow together in this tradition in our journey of spiritual growth and learning. So please don't be shy. There are no wrong answers. So the question that I'm presenting to you is, when you hear the term congregational polity or congregationalists, what does that mean to you? You are a seminarian, so you might have a good answer. When you hear the words congregational polity or congregationalists, what does that mean to you?
Congregational polity means that we as Unitarian Universalists decide on our own governance. So while we have the Unitarian Universalist Association, they are not like a pope, there are not overlords. We pick our own ministers and we choose our own bylaws. That
Absolutely. Anyone else? Yes. We choose our own ministers, yes. We call our ministers. Yes.
We own our own building and pay our own bills.
Own our own building and pay our own bills. Anyone else? Yes.
Not scared of change.
We're not scared of change. Okay. All right. Yes. We are a community. Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing. It is important that we engage in these conversations in an open manner because it is inherent to our identity as Unitarian Universalists. So here is how a lesson from the Tapestry of Faith, a curriculum about UU identity that's available on the UUA website, defines congregational polity. It is the rights and responsibilities of each properly organized congregation to make its own decisions about its own affairs without recourse of any higher human authority. In this sense, congregational polity is a drastic shift from episcopal polity, the church governance model based on the authority of bishops. So the Cambridge Platform outlines a biblical foundation of congregational polity which spells out this shift that challenges the Bishop of England's authority. One might say that the Cambridge Platform of 1648 was the New England Church's Declaration of Independence. As with the other two polities, Episcopal, which is derived from the power of bishops, gained from the biblical understanding of dictates that came from the Apostle Paul, and presbytery, seen as bodies of elders at congregations to which Paul wrote. The Cambridge Platform also used biblical grounding and the take on authority which took that authority from the bishop and placed it in the hands of the congregation. If the Cambridge Platform is the New England Church's Declaration of Independence, then the notion that congregations are responsible to only themselves is the state's rights of Unitarian Universalism. You see, the Cambridge Platform was not a document that defined how we were not in relationship with each other, but it was grounded in how the Holy Spirit moves within congregations, like at Acts chapter 2 on the day of Pentecost, and how congregations are connected and interconnected to each other in the image and in communion with Christ Jesus, defined as the new covenant at Luke 22, verse 20. In my understanding, congregants, like the bishop, never were viewed as the source of authority, but the tools through which the will of God was done. I would say that this is not broader day Unitarian Universalist concepts. These ideas of Jesus and Holy Spirit are not something that's shared amongst all of us, but within some of us. As a living tradition, I do not believe that we've lost the principles of congregationalism. However, I fear that not adequately naming where the power and authority that moves throughout the congregation comes from has left room for narratives of personal interest before community and ultra-autonomous congregations, which has misrepresented what it means to be congregationalists, hindering our capacity as congregations to move together and grow. I believe this hindrance of hyper self-interest and isolation in itself speaks to the inadequacy of such narratives about our congregational polity in this time. In an era where technology has so much potential to bring us together in new ways, but seems to push us apart, we need to understand how congregationalism calls us to be there for each other and to hold one another. Let us also not forget that we are in the middle of a global climate crisis that requires collective action that is beyond these walls. And speaking of these walls, Congregational Polity was written in the 17th century, which at that time had no concepts of faith communities that were available online, that you can be anywhere in the world and connect and be in covenantal relationship with someone, or the concept of meeting in spiritual community at the coffee shop down the street. These are all challenges and questions that our Association of UU Congregations is engaged in, and in ways is held back by our misinterpretations of an outdated document. The Reverend Dr. Susan Frederick Gray, the president of our Unitarian Universalist Association, speaks of the association in this way. The UUA is the embodiment of our covenants our member congregations make to one another. Again, I'm going to invite you into conversation and to participate. Could I get a few brief thoughts about what covenant means to you? Promise? Commitment. I'm sorry, could you say that again? Agreement? Anyone else? Yes?
There's a difference between human covenant and covenant that may include spirituality.
A difference between human covenant and covenant that may include spirituality. Yes, thank you. Yes? Assuming responsibility. Yes, thank you. To protect. Thank you. So this dialogue to me is a significant part of our covenant, that these sacred living promises we make to one another are shaped by our collective discernment. In the 2013 summer issue of the UU World, Victoria E. Sanford described covenant in this way. A covenant is a living, breathing aspiration made new every day. It can't be enforced by consequence, but it may be reinforced by forgiveness and by grace. When we stumble, when we forget, when we mess up. In Hebrews 8, Jesus is named again as the new covenant, through which sin is erased and through which a new sacred promise between God and the people of God is made. I think it is noteworthy that even God's first covenant in this chapter is aspirational, that was not perfect and that needed to be revised to be made more whole and more inclusive. I see in the scriptures Victoria's description of covenant over and over and over again, these sacred promises made between nations and people, and even between things like ourselves and things that are larger than us. I think specifically in this time of global climate crisis, the covenant that we have between us as people and the earth has been broken and needs to be revisited and reestablished. So, a question that I have that comes to mind is covenant itself the new covenant? The aspiration and the moments of grace our Congregationalist forebears saw as reflections of Jesus and their communal relationships. In 1894, was Reverend James Vell Blake right to say, "Love is the spirit of this church," showing itself as the spirit that moves within Unitarian Universalists that keep us showing up for one another and on the side of love? I believe the answer is yes. After over 370 years of the Cambridge platform, it may be time to acknowledge that the power and authority is not held within congregants themselves, but within the promises that we make to one another. It is surely time to acknowledge that the intercongregational relationship has expanded beyond that of the relationship of the small cluster of congregations of the church at that time. The UUA is the embodiment of the covenant our member congregations have made to one another. It should be a living, breathing aspiration made new by the continued engagement and fulfillment of our sacred promises our congregations freely make to one another to be in relationship with one another. A new congregational polity is called for that emphasizes the authority of our sacred promises and expands the table of welcome to new covenanting communities that operate outside of our brick and mortar congregational context. With a congregational polity reflective of our actual governance that de-emphasizes the misrepresentation of states' rights congregational polity, there is potential for our congregations to meet our promises to one another and for our faith community to continue to grow. Let us continue to equip our fellow congregations for justice seeking, develop our future leaders in love, and amplify our UU values in the world by leaning into our covenant. Thank you.
Every week, we have an opportunity to practice our values through sharing our resources. Our pledges are at the core of our spiritual practice of generosity. In addition, the church shares half of all the non-pledge cash in our offering plate with the community organization. In this way, we commit our resources in line with our belief that this congregation is interdependent with the world beyond these walls. This month, we share the plate with We Got This Milwaukee, a grassroots community garden initiative that empowers young Black males to become active in the beautification and cleanup of their own community. May the practice of giving bring us joy. The offering will now be gratefully received. Please rise as you are able and join me in our responsive reading entitled We Need One Another by George E. Odell. We need one another when we mourn and would be comforted. We need one another when we are in despair, in temptation, and need to be recalled to our best selves again. We need one another in our hour of success, when we look for someone to share our triumphs.
We need one another in our hour of defeat, when our encouragement we might endure.
We need one another when we come to die, and would have gentle hands prepare us for the journey.
All our lives we are in need, and others are in need of us.
And now for our closing hymn, number 67, We Sing Now Together.